Have you ever picked up a prescription and thought, why does this cost so much? You're not imagining things. Americans pay more for prescription drugs than anyone else in the world, by a long shot. Let's look at one example. Humira, a drug used to treat arthritis. In the US, it costs around $6,000 a month. In the UK, just $800. In Germany, even less. Another one you've probably heard of, Ozempic, US price about $900 a month. In Germany, just $100. So what gives? It all comes down to how drugs are priced in the US. And how that's not how most of the world does it. In countries like Canada, France, and Japan, governments negotiate prices with drug companies or set price caps. That keeps costs low for everyone. But in the US, the government doesn't negotiate drug prices for most people, and companies can basically charge whatever the market will tolerate. And that brings us to something called the Most Favoured Nation Rule, or MFN, a policy idea that's making headlines again, especially with Trump back in the mix. So what is it? The MFN rule says this: the US should never pay more for a drug than the lowest price paid by another developed country. In other words, if Germany is paying $100 for a medication and the US is paying $900, under MFN, the price would adjust down to match that lower rate. Sounds like a no-brainer, right? But here's where it gets complicated. Big Pharma isn't exactly thrilled. Why? Because the US is their profit engine. Here's a fact. The US makes up just 4% of the world's population, but accounts for over 40% of global pharmaceutical revenue. That's how drug companies can afford massive R&D budgets, marketing campaigns, and still return huge profits to shareholders. Now, supporters of MFN, like Trump, argue that Americans are basically subsidizing cheap drug prices for the rest of the world. He says, if other countries are getting a deal, why shouldn't we? In 2025, Trump revived this policy and sent letters to the CEOs of 17 major drug companies, including Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, and AstraZeneca, demanding lower US prices or else. What's the or else? He's threatening to slap major tariffs on drug imports, starting low but ramping up to 150% or more if companies don't play ball. Critics of MFN say, whoa, slow down. They argue that slashing prices too fast could lead to less investment in innovation, shortages, and even companies pulling out of the US market altogether. There are also legal hurdles. Without an act of Congress, implementing MFN broadly is really difficult, especially in the commercial insurance market. So what's the takeaway? Drug prices in the US are sky high, and yes, Americans are paying way more than people in other countries. MFN is one attempt to fix that, by forcing prices down to match the best deals worldwide. It could save Americans billions, but it's controversial, complicated, and far from a done deal. So, will it actually happen? That's the big question. The pharmaceutical industry is pushing back hard, and the clock is ticking. Trump's deadline for drug companies is September 2025. If they don't act, we could see a showdown between the White House and Big Pharma. The fight over drug prices in America is just getting started.